it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen. I found out the secret behind the mandatory summer camp in my town. It's more horrifying than I could ever imagine. It's been a year since I escaped my town and the horrifying secret it's kept. I want to share my experience with you, but it's more for my benefit. I want to put it in words so I can accept it. I was 13 years old when I first saw a kid trying to escape. Clara Danvers was a senior at Aceville High School. She wore pastel colours and flower crowns in her hair. I didn't know her very well since I attended the middle school down the road, but I knew she was one of the most popular girls in her class. Clara was the type all girls in our town aspired to be. Her beauty wasn't eye-catching in a town like Aceville, where all of its teens were ridiculously attractive. Oh, and camp was mandatory in Aceville. At the time, I wasn't sure why. All I knew was that all 18-year-olds were obligated to attend camp for the remainder of their summer before college. And yes, you'd be right in thinking it's practically a human rights violation. It was their summer. Aceville's teens were teetering on the edge of adulthood and responsibilities. Their teen years and beloved childhood is dwindling, and that last summer meant a lot to them. Of course they fought back. Clara Danvers didn't strike me as a rebel. She looked like the type of girl who followed all the rules and joined as many extracurriculars as possible. She had the perfect friends, the perfect boyfriend, perfect A's, and was Harvard-bound, thanks to word of mouth travelling around. However, on July 16th, 2016, I saw a different side to her. Oh, the memory's vague, though I remember small tidbits. I remember being in the store with my mother. I remember it being a hot day, the kind of heat that I hated. It was too warm to think straight, and all I wanted to do was sit in my garden and read. Didn't exactly have a choice whether I accompanied my mother. Oh, she'd blackmailed me with the reward of getting a new comic. Mum had been talking to the cashier. She was friends with half the town, so I wasn't surprised when every person she passed by said hello, shooting a smile at me. I remember being bored. I needed to pee, and I was at that point in my life when I was wary of being seen shopping with my mom. It was pretty much social suicide for a 7th grader to be seen with her mom. So, keeping my head down and pulling my baseball cap further over my face, I digressed to the comic book section. All of my favorites were there, and I had $10 to spend. I was in my element. Skimming through Spider-Man issues, I found myself captivated by the colors. When Spider-Man was a kid's comic, I knew that. I'd made the mistake of pulling one out of my backpack at school, only for Summer Forrest to snatch it out of my hands and hold it up in the air, a wicked smile on her face. You still read Spider-Man? No, I'd snap back, my cheeks burning bright. Liar, Summer snorted. You still read Spider-Man? Isn't that a kid's comic? Well, I'm not going to say it was traumatizing. Some kids had laughed along, and some had ignored Summer. I snatched the comic off of her and shoved it back in my bag. Then, on the way to class, I'd shoved it in the trash. I still wasn't completely healed from that incident, so ignoring a smiling Mary Jane in a funky lab coat, I moved on to the more adult comics. Well, they were adult in my kid brain, at least. Picking up Teen Titans, I flipped it over and scanned the back. Mum was still chatting to the cashier, and my urge to pee wasn't going away. I figured stepping outside to cool off would be a good idea, even when I knew I was just stepping back into the baking heat, away from the pathetic cooling fan sitting near the door. My plan was to go back to the car and blast the AC. Mum was going to be in there for a while. I could tell by the way she was leaning against the counter, already making her routes. I was sliding into Mum's car, trying not to wince when my bare leg sunk into the hot leather, when a scream rang out, startling me. When I twisted around, scanning the parking lot in front of the store, I saw her. Clara Danvers, dressed in shorts and t-shirt, her sneakers pounding against the steaming tarmac, her strict blonde ponytail flying behind her. Clara was running for her life. And at first I thought she was running from some kind of animal. Coyote attacks were common. but not in broad daylight. Except Clara wasn't running from an animal. I recognized Mrs. Peters, one of the high school teachers. Mom had been friendly with her. Now, Mrs. Peters was in her mid-40s and wore thick sweaters in 90-degree heat. The last thing I thought I'd ever see was the teacher sprinting after the retreating senior, the kind of look in her eyes that I'd known my whole life, replaced with a look of intense determination. It was almost comical, like I was watching a cartoon. I laughed. Well, I felt bad, but it was hard to ignore the hysterical spew of laughter crawling up my throat. Clara was a good runner. Maybe she was on the track team, though Mrs. Peters, amazingly, was faster. She was in good shape for her age, long strides catapulting her further forwards, swinging arms driving momentum. Clara Danvers! Well, the teacher wasn't out of breath, though neither was Clara. Neither of them were giving up. Watching this bizarre display, I found myself following them, though I was slower, darting behind parked cars, keeping myself hidden. There was something clutched in Clara's hand. When she brought it to her ear, her eyes were wide and wild, lips moving frantically, and I realized she was talking to someone. When Clara twisted around to scan for the teacher, I knew she'd made a mistake. I watched the scene unravel in front of me like it was going in slow motion. Clara's phone slipped from her grasp and she let out a sharp cry, ducking to try and snatch it back up. But the teacher was on her tail. Miss Danvers, you were acting like a child, the woman chastised, reaching out and snatching the girl by the back of her t-shirt. Clara shrieked and tried to battle her way out of the teacher's grip, but Mrs. Peters' grip was harsh, her fingernails sticking into the bare flesh of Clara's arms. Get off me! The girl was acting like a caged animal. Didn't understand. It was just camp, right? I understood Clara and her class not wanting to go because it was their last summer to be free and be kids again. Maybe the girl was acting dramatic, but I could empathize with her. I watched Mrs. Peters drag the girl, spitting and cursing, away. I can still remember their words. Clara Danvers didn't swear, at least that's what I thought. She was the golden girl after all. But Clara was yelling names, presumably those of her friends, and Mrs. Danvers was laughing. Miss Danvers, please calm down. You know you have to attend camp, and we were very clear at the assembly that we would take necessary measures to make sure every senior is on that bus. Clara dug the soles of her Converse into the tarmac. She reminded me of a petulant child throwing a tantrum. I don't want to go to camp. What the hell is wrong with you? I'm not a kid anymore. You are a part of this town as well as the high school, which means rules still apply. I'm 18. Mrs. Peters ignored her outburst. As I said, you are still a student. Therefore, you are expected to follow rules. One of our town's rules is that the senior class will attend a mandatory summer camp before college. This has been going on for years, Miss Danvers. I expected more from a class valedictorian. You've been one of the smartest in your class since your freshman year, Clara. I did not expect this lack of intelligence from you. Do not ruin your reputation by acting like a child. Clara sputtered. What did you just say? The two of them were getting further away, and all I could do was watch their shadows stretch across the sidewalk. I was debating whether to follow them to wherever they were going, but then a hand was grabbing my shoulder. I twisted around and found my mother. Well, she didn't look mad or confused. Mom didn't question why I'd disappeared. Instead, her gaze had snapped to where I'd been watching Clara and the teacher. Her eyebrows furrowed, her lip curling like she was about to say something before seemingly snapping out of it. Mom shoved paper bags of groceries into my arms with a light smile, and I struggled to get a strict hold of them. She was looking at me, but I could have sworn her gaze was wandering, searching for something. Did you pick a comic book? Managing to find my voice, I shook my head. Well, I felt kind of sick. Clara Danvers hadn't had a choice whether she went to camp or not. None of her class did. And when they tried to skip out, they were treated like animals. All for what? A few weeks in the sun with the senior class, the town's murky lake, and mosquitoes. couldn't understand why it was mandatory. No other town forced their kids to go to camp, so why did ours? I tried to smile at Mum. They're all childish. Can we just go home? Mum looked like she was going to protest, but nodded. She had that expression, the one I dreaded. The one when she was trying to read me, delving into my mind. Well, I wasn't exactly a talkative kid, so my mum turned into my therapist, constantly demanding to know how I was feeling. On that occasion, however, it was different. She paid no attention to my sickly cheeks and the lump in my throat. "All right, are you sure you're okay?" I don't know how I managed, but I did keep my mouth shut and nod, following Mum back to the car. Well, it's not like Aceville's bizarre rule was a secret. I just didn't want to talk about it. Neither did Mum, from the look on her face. Instead of grilling me like usual, she took me for a chocolate fudge sundae at our local diner. I still remember the sickly feeling in my stomach when I struggled to swallow it, washing it down with flat Coke, which made me feel worse. I tried hard to pretend everything was okay, but I couldn't stop thinking about Clara and the way she'd been treated. Dread filled me like poison, shivers rattling up and down my spine. I couldn't sit still. Was that my future? Was I going to be hunted down like that? Well, that's what I kept thinking. When Mum was talking excitedly about her plans for our next family vacation, I was discreetly counting on my fingers how many years I had before I turned 18. Until seeing her dragged like an animal by a teacher I considered one of the nicest people in town, well, I'd looked forward to turning 18. It was the age of independence, the peak of teenagehood. Though excitement turned to dread. I never saw Clara again, or the class of 2016. It's a well-known fact that freshly graduated kids go to camp and then straight to college. But I still found it strange. Once they were gone, the town forgot them and turned their attention to the new senior class. Watch this happen for 5 years. Kids followed in Clara's footsteps. She'd started the rebellion after all, though none of them came close to escape like her. Watch them tear through the woods, laughing and whooping like it was child's play. The girls stripped down to two-piece swimsuits, and in 2018, Mikey Blake streaked. When it turned into a game, Clara's story spread like a virus, and seniors took it as an opportunity to one-up her. I guess it became less of something to be scared of and more to anticipate. Well, sure, no kid wanted to be stuck at summer camp, but it was the hunt beforehand that excited them. Well, they were always caught, always wrestled to the ground and treated just like Clara Danvers. Over the years, however, it became less scary to watch and more exciting, like watching the latest blockbuster. And who didn't want to watch kids chased by teachers with way too much time on their hands? I watched them year after year and acted like it was a game. My friends and I made bets on who would and who wouldn't get caught. We sat on the side of the sidewalk, with beers and burgers from the diner, cheering them on. We didn't pay attention to how they were treated. In our minds, it was fun. Aceville felt like it was stuck in limbo between the 1980s and the present. Well, sure, we had cell phones and TikTok, but my aunt and uncle drove a jalopy. Our local diner had a 50s aesthetic, and half the town didn't even have televisions. Maybe they preferred to stay in the old days. Oh, it's not like I was complaining. I liked it. I liked that we were different from other towns. We were small, our population under 5,000. Aceville, an idealistic town where there were more teens than adults. My friend Nick used to joke that it was like living in the world of Stranger Things, and I had to agree. Luckily, though, we weren't under threat from aliens from different dimensions and teenagers with carry-light powers. 5 years after Clara, after watching the same shit year after year, it was finally our turn. The class of 2020. I was standing in the exact same store I'd been in 5 years ago when I first saw Clara. When I first witnessed the hunt. This time, however, I wasn't with my mother. I'd managed to score a part-time job to pay for college, and I just finished my shift. Smells Like Teen Spirit was playing for the millionth time that day on the crappy intercom radio. My boss couldn't afford a decent one, so the quality was pretty bad. Thankfully, the store was empty that afternoon. It was a hot July summer day, and the majority of the town, minus my class, were at the local swimming pool cooling off. Once again, it was the kind of heat that made me want to bury my head in the ground. It was my last day at my job, and I'd been rewarded with half my wage and a crushed piece of chocolate cake wrapped in a napkin. And I threw the cake away and stuffed the crumpled notes in my shorts. I should have been thinking about college that day. I should have been thinking about how the hell I was going to pay for my tuition with barely $300. But I wasn't. Of course I wasn't. Checking my phone, I made sure I blocked my mother, as well as my aunt and uncle. Well, Dad wasn't in the picture. Not much to say. Never knew him. Checking and rechecking the time, I pulled off my work polo and stuffed it in the trash. I spent the last hours of my shift scanning through Spider-Man comics. They were popular again, though I had no idea why. Tons of people in my year openly read them, and nobody batted an eyelid. When I stepped into the heat that afternoon, I was hopeful, excited. Unlike my classmates and years before us, I had no intention of joining the game, and I had no intention of going to camp. I'd been curious as a kid, but over the years the novelty had worn off. It was my last summer with Nick and Bobby, and I was going to spend every day with them doing what I wanted. I was going to smoke and drink and get freaking high. We'd spent half the year planning a road trip to Florida, and I was going to use the time away from town to finally come clean to Mom about Bobby. I was going to tell her everything, disappear for the summer, and sneak back in September and grab my things. I didn't have plans for post-summer. I was smart enough for my dream college, but it was my lack of cash. Mom wasn't that well off, and had made it clear that if I wanted to go, I'd pay it myself. The talkie in my hand was store-bought. Nick had thrown it at me the night before. Blinking in dizzying sunlight, I scanned the parking lot. So far it was clear, though I had to be careful. I had no idea why, but the teachers had documented where every student would be on the day of camp. Mom had obviously told them about me being at work, but as for the others, it was a mystery how they knew where they were. Tying my hair into a ponytail, I stepped out into the sticky air that made my skin crawl. I twisted the dial on the talkie and held it to my mouth. Before I could speak, Nick's voice came through in a burst of hissing static. Fuck, it's hot. I'm sweating where I shouldn't be sweating. Rolling my eyes, I couldn't resist a smile. We have perfectly good working phones, Nick. What are the talkies for? It's fun, he shot back. Hey, you at the store? I'm heading towards the car. He paused. So far, no sign of teachers. I saw Danny Rue and Sadie Lily run into the woods with a bunch of others. They're skipping out too? Duh, Nick teased. Apparently they're heading to the Big Apple. Sadie's sister lives there. He let out a sharp hiss. Oh, shit. I got visuals on Miss Cater. Oh, she's on the warpath. Just gone past the dry cleaners. I nodded to myself. Right, let's just focus on getting out of here. I started walking, checking for pursuers. According to the mass text the school had sent this morning, all seniors were expected to be on the bus at 1:30. It was 1:15. The plan was to get to Nick's car, where we'd stuffed all our bags the night before, and step on it. Of course, parents had figured we were going to try and flee town, so our cars had been confiscated. Luckily, though, Nick worked at a junkyard. He'd spent months turning a hunk of junk into a decent enough ride, so we were already one step ahead of them. Starting to jog, I moved across the parking lot. Bobby, are you there? My stomach sunk when the name escaped my lips, that feeling I'd been fighting with ever since we'd met, returning with a vengeance. It wasn't confusion when I'd been 14 and had butterflies. Nope, it was guilt. I'd made a promise that I would tell Mum about us, but Mum was different. She wouldn't understand. She hated the idea of me dating. I took a guy home for dinner in sophomore year, and she politely told him to leave. So God knows what Mum was going to do when she found out about Bobby. Bobby's voice was soft and smooth, slipping so effortlessly through static like it belonged in there. I'm about 2 minutes away, already in my mom's kitchen for snacks before I left. Score! Nick whooped. See, this is why I prefer you to Addie. Well, this time I spluttered. Take that back. I've been working all morning, asshole. I could hear the grin in his voice. You're not making your case any better. Bobby's voice cut through our laughter. Did you tell your mom about us yet, Addie? I stopped laughing, my footsteps faltering. The sun was a bastard baking into my back, and I struggled to speak through the breath caught in my throat. I was struggling to coerce basic words out when I caught a movement in the corner of my eye. Expecting it to be a teacher, I started backing away, lowering my hand holding the talkie. But then I glimpsed familiar blonde curls tied into pigtails catching the sun almost perfectly. Well, the figure wasn't that far away, but I saw all of her and I felt myself shatter. I wanted to tell Mum, I really did, but it was hard. Bobby, Robin Atwood, was the first girl I fell for. First girl that made me believe in love, as dumb as it sounds. Even after dating for almost 5 months, I lost my breath when I caught sight of her. But I still smiled, I couldn't help it. It's hard not to smile. Bobby was beautiful like every other kid in town, and I was still struggling to figure out how she liked someone like me. It was far from the definition of beauty, or even pretty. Cute, okay looking, but I had a stubby nose and my eyes were too far apart. My dark hair the only thing hiding my huge forehead. To put it simply, I wasn't attractive. I'm not going to say I was the only one. Bad eggs existed in Aceville. No, I wasn't the only one. It just sucked that my parents had given me sucky genes. Bobby. My voice sort of broke when I said her name, and I hated that. That made it obvious that I hadn't told Mum. Well, Bobby was out, and she'd told her mother when we started dating, and I'd chickened out. Luckily, my mum didn't talk to Bobbies. If she did, and forget camp, I'd probably be at military school. Bobby's smile was soft. She was wearing her favorite dress and battered Converse. Not exactly the best outfit to escape town in. Instead of talking about my mum, she pulled me into a quick hug and laced her fingers in mine. She reached one hand into her tote bag hanging from her shoulder and pulled out a pack of M&Ms, waving them in my face with a smirk. They were my favorite. Oh, I loved the peanut ones. Yeah, I did get you these, since you promised, but sure, I'll eat them on my own. I scoffed, shoving her when she laughed. Bitch. All right, I'll give them to Nick. I tried to snatch the pack off of her. He doesn't even like them. Oh, Bobby was fast, and so were her instincts. Before I could grab them, she'd shoved them in her bag. We should get going. At that moment, all the dread eating me up inside slipped away. I pulled Bobby into a run, and we left the parking lot, darting across the street. I could hear yelling in the distance. It was no doubt our classmates either getting caught or pulling a fast one. Nick, I said into the talkie, you close? To my surprise, there was no answer. Nick had found every opportunity to use these darn things, so it was odd that he wasn't answering. Bobby tried her talkie. Nick, are you there? The junkyard was a 5-minute walk, and maybe a 2-minute run if we sprinted. Nick wasn't answering, and the closer we got to the junkyard, well, a bad feeling started to coil in the pit of my gut. When I slowed down, bending over with my hands on my knees, gasping into humid air, Bobby tried to contact Nick again. She shook the talkie with a frown. Maybe it's faulty. I fixed her with a skeptical look. Both of them? Shaking my head, I straightened up and pulled my phone out of my shorts. 25 past. The teachers were most likely doing a head count and were already on the prowl. I was shaking with adrenaline. We should get to the car, I gasped out. Our best case scenario is the idiot got distracted or broke the talkie. We shouldn't assume the worst. Bobby nodded, though her smile was thin. When we started running again, our shoes pounding the steaming tarmac, I felt a rush of déjà vu. My ponytail flew behind me, and I pumped my arms and legs hard, propelling my body faster. I was just like Clara, except unlike her, I was going to make it. At least, that's what I thought. The junkyard was in my sight when the talkie crackled with static. I was frowning at the mass of beaten-up cars covered in dirt and old engines when an all-too-familiar voice filled the air. Adeline Carlstone and Robin Atwood. The voice of our math teacher, Mr. Fuller, sent shivers crawling up my spine. I felt sick. There was no way he'd tracked us down that fast. How was that even possible? Suddenly all I could think about was Clara. All I could think about was the way she was dragged, kicking and screaming, and our class had treated it like a joke, a game. That was until it was our turn. Mr. Fuller's voice was stern. I suggest abandoning whatever plan you have and making your way to the school bus, please. When I was considering smashing the talkie against the gravel sidewalk, he continued. Your friend Nick Castor is a good runner, I'll give him that. But not fast enough, I'm afraid. Asshole. Nick's voice came through loud and clear, but it was too clear. Twisting around, my heart dropped into my gut. Nick's voice wasn't just clear on the talkie. It was close, too close. I froze. Bobby pulled her hand from mine and squeaked, her hand slapping over her mouth. When I saw the two of them shuffling towards us, Mr. Fuller dragging Nick, I had the split-second thought of grabbing Bobby and running for it. But I wasn't going to leave my best friend. It didn't take long before the three of us were rounded up. Nicholas Castor was the type of guy who shouldn't have been as close to me as he was. He was varsity captain of the Aceville Aardvarks and, like Bobby, was pretty attractive, with dark curls contrasting pale skin and freckles dotting his cheeks. Are the restraints really necessary? Nick spat when he was cuffed and pushed into the back of Mr. Fuller's car. Well, some might call it kidnapping, but in Aceville on July 16th, it was the norm. The car ride didn't take long and was uncomfortable. The three of us were squashed like sardines, Nick's legs sticking into my bag, Bobby's head on my shoulder. When we got to school, we were thankfully uncuffed and transferred to the bus. I wasn't expecting us to be the ones they were waiting on. Even Sadie and Danny had been caught. When I was making my way to the back of the bus, keeping a tight hold of Bobby's hand and Nick's sleeve, we were greeted to a deluge of faces. Some kids held their hand up for high fives, which Nick happily slapped, but the majority of them looked disappointed. If we'd failed to escape, then it really was impossible. There was no way out. Camp was inevitable. I found a seat quickly, right at the back, pulling Nick and Bobby next to me. Well, that failed. Nick let out a nervous laugh when the bus started moving. I was frowning at two men dressed in black that had jumped on last minute. They didn't look like anyone I knew. The two of them stationed themselves at the front. They made me feel strange, like they weren't supposed to be here. Well, I had no choice but to settle down in my seat and let the nauseating movements of the bus send my stomach hurtling into my throat. Nick pulled out his switch and Bobby lay her head against the window. I guess none of them wanted to talk, though I couldn't blame them. When my phone rang an hour into the journey, I switched it off without looking at the screen. I don't know how long we were on the bus, but at points I felt like we were going around in circles. I could have sworn we'd passed the same sign, but when I pointed it out, Nick mumbled something unintelligible, far too invested in one of the new Pokemon games, and Bobby had fallen asleep. Outside, the sky had turned dark. Now, I could have been wrong, but I was sure we'd been on the bus for hours, and nobody was questioning it. The lights above flickered, and around me, my classmates were either asleep or had earphones corked in. When we came to an abrupt stop, Bobby and Nick, as well as our class, seemed to snap out of it, the trance-like state that had swallowed them up. They started to ask questions, asking where we were. We were all ignored. Instead, one of the two men I'd spotted earlier stood up and addressed us. Aceville Seniors. He cleared his throat. My name is Lawrence Shade, and I'm a talent recruiter. In a few minutes, you'll watch a small film we've prepared which will give us an idea where to categorize you. Please be aware that watching this film is mandatory. What? Summer Forest laughed. This is a joke, right? Isn't this supposed to be camp? As soon as the words slipped from my mouth, I pressed my face against the window. It was raining, no, pouring. I don't know how I didn't notice. Nick leaned over me and pulled a face. Hey, when did it get dark? Bobby nodded, and she sent me a sharp look. How long have we been on this bus? Before I could answer, a portable TV screen at the back of my seat lit up, with first a white screen which turned bright green and then yellow, flicking from color to color, flashing in my eyes. Nick hissed. What the fuck is this? But he was watching the screen, Bobby too, like it was drawing them in, leeching onto their minds. Murmurs around the bus confirmed my classmates were equally confused. I squeezed my eyes shut at first, but I was overcome with an overwhelming sense of curiosity. I let my eyes flutter open, but as soon as my gaze landed on the screen, on the flashing colors, a sharp pain rumbled in my right temple. The colors kept going. I remember the sequence perfectly. Red, yellow, blue, green, repeat. I don't know how long I was staring at those colors. I don't know how long my body was frozen, my eyes unblinking, but I could feel my body reacting. My mouth was open, unable to close, a thin sliver of drool running down my chin. There was something warm, something wet and warm, sliding from my nostril. I couldn't wipe it away. My body was stuck, like I was paralyzed, like I'd never move again. And then, just like that, the screen flashed off. Bobby drew in a sharp breath and straightened in her seat, and Nick blinked rapidly. I expected him to freak out, but he was strangely quiet. Addie, Bobby's whisper was sharp. Your nose. Swiping gingerly at my nose with my bare arm, I let out a shuddery breath. God, we had to get out. Whatever the place was, it wasn't summer camp. I could hear hisses around me, at the back of the bus and the front, voices collapsing into white noise. When I risked turning my head, I spotted Serena Kyle with her hand pressed over her nose and mouth. She was doing a bad job of hiding the crimson stream flooding through her fingers. And suddenly, it felt like my world was crumbling in front of me. The two men started up the aisle, labeling each student. They held cans of spray paint-like weapons, marking us with different colors. There were 3 colors, red, blue, and purple. When my classmates tried to protest, tried to make a run for it, they were cuffed and shoved back in their seats. There was so much screaming and fighting, I couldn't hear what the men with the spray paint were saying. Like they were animals, like they were Clara. I couldn't help thinking it. Is this what had happened to her? Nick grabbed my hand and I grabbed Bobby's. Bobby was sobbing quietly, struggling to speak through her sobs. When any of us tried to dial 911, the line was dead. When one of the men reached my classmates in front of me, the front of their shirts were sprayed deep, dark blue. The man studied the 3 girls like they were pieces of meat. There was a sickening smile on his face. These are all good, he turned and yelled to the front of the bus. The girls he was talking about started talking over each other, but he blanked them. Blues will go into processing first, and then purples if we can fix them. The man's words horrified me. They were like ice seeping into my bones. When he reached me, he grabbed for his can of red paint and sprayed a red circle on the front of my shirt. It was ice cold against my skin, and I had to bite back a scream. I thought he was going to raise his hand to me, but instead he stuck his podgy fingers under the blood crusted under my nose. Defect, he said. What? I hissed out. What? What do you mean? He ignored me, moving on to Nick, this time spraying a purple circle. He seemed to study my friend before grabbing Nick by the scruff of his neck and peering at the boy. "Pending," he growled, his fingernails grazing over freckles dotted on my best friend's cheeks. "Oh, I'm not the one who will make the final choice. You better be as pretty as you seem in good light, boy." Nick looked too stunned to speak. Bobby shrieked when he sprayed a blue circle on the front of her dress. I tried to stop him, but I was dragged by my hair, ragged like a wild animal. "This one's good too," he yelled to the front. When the men were finished with the spray cans, we were told to file off the bus and join our respective color groups. When we tried to run, we were grabbed and thrown off the bus. I'm not sure how much time had passed before I was separated from Nick and Bobby, the two of them dragged away, while I was shoved onto my knees in dirt which stained my legs. It was pouring, and my ponytail was plastered to my back. Other Reds were forced next to me. There were around 12 of us in total. I know that because I took snapshots of each of them. Not names, faces. Names hurt, so I remembered them by face. I do remember Summer Forrest next to me. I remember dirt streaked down her face, blood dripping down her chin. That's what we all shared, the Reds. We'd all suffered the same nosebleed, crimson streaking down our faces, mixing with the rain. The 12 of us were put in a line in front of the bus, when a woman in a pristine white suit and red hair addressed us under the light of her flashlight. I looked past her, and my gaze found our camp. Oh, not a camp. There was no sign of a campsite. The type of thing I'd expected all these years, leading to my senior year. No. Instead, in front of us was a multi-story building. In the distance, groups of purples and blues were being escorted inside automatic doors, while we were left out in the rain for hours. The sky turned light and then dark, and we were made to wait. We could have been there for days. I lost all sense of time. I lost all sense of my own humanity. Well, I knew why they were doing this to us, but I was in denial. I was in denial when 12 became 11, and then 10, and then 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3. Someone was screaming. I couldn't breathe. There were people in front of me. I knew them. I'd known them since childhood. Mr. Doherty, the guy who lived across the street with his poodle, Gloria. Eve Simmons, who owned the diner Nick, Bobby, and I had frequented for most of our lives. Mr. and Mrs. State, the elderly couple who brought over pudding when I was homesick from school. Someone I didn't want to believe was there because I was in denial. But they were, with a gun held in their hand, pointing it between my eyes. I don't know when 3 became 2, each gunshot ricocheting in my skull. All I remember is waiting to follow the others, squeezing my eyes shut and screaming into the night. But then a warm hand was sliding into mine and pulling me up. There was a gunshot and the sound of a body hitting the ground. Summer. I remember Nick pulling me away, but I will never forget Summer Forrest's body lying in a heap, pooling red, stemming around willowy blonde hair. I don't know how Nick got me away, but all I recall is tripping over my own feet. He pulled us into trees and undergrowth, and branches scratched at my face and pulled at my hair, but I didn't care. When Nick finally turned around to look at me, I screamed. I screamed until he slammed his hand over my mouth to shut me up. The last time I'd seen my best friend, he had definitely had 2 eyes, both intact. Now one of them was hanging out. The skin of his face had been scraped away, leaving bloody flaps of flesh where his cheeks used to be. His lips were swollen, half of his hair sheared off. "I got out," he managed to gasp out. "It's okay. I got out. They had me on a ton of anesthetic, so just bear with me." "Out?" I shrieked back. "Out of where?" Nick held his eye inside his socket with one hand and held mine with the other. "Processing." "What? What are you talking about?" Nick pulled me further into the trees. That place, he gasped out. It's a factory. A factory, Nick said. We weren't at a camp. We've been taken to a factory. Clara Danvers and the class of 2016 and every class since have been taken to a factory. We weren't at a fucking camp. We were being turned into something horrific, and I was a defect. They didn't want me. Bobby was still in there. I had to. Oh, fuck. I had to get her out. 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 I found out the secret behind my town's mandatory summer camp. I got out because I'm a defect. It's been several days, I apologize. Far longer than I promised. I tried writing last night and the night before, but my brain can only take so much. If I think too hard or fully immerse myself in the memories, it hurts. I mean, really fucking hurts. To the point of me screaming. Well, I can't stop screaming and it feels like I'm drowning, but I want to continue. It's hard to look back on what myself and my classmates went through. The filthy secret our town hid from us for 18 years. But I have to. If I don't, everything that happened will be nothing but a memory, a haunting nightmare in the back of my mind that keeps me up most nights. Now I know this sounds awful, and if I'm honest, I feel like I'm hurting myself, punishing myself. But I want to relive those emotions. What I felt, what we felt. I want to go back and experience it all again, so I can tell myself that it's real. It happened. For me to fully accept what happened to us, it needs to be in writing. Well, I read what you thought, and I'd rather not respond until I'm finished writing this story. My story. Bobby and Nick's. The story behind Aceville's existence, as well as our own. And if I'm going to tell you everything, then there will be more parts. I'm not sure how many. As many as it takes, I guess. In a way, I feel like I'm telling my experience into a book of sorts. Anything to bring light to Aceville and what they did to us. When Nick rescued me from my inevitable fate as a defect, I was still seeing my mother holding the gun pointing between my eyes. I was still seeing her vacant eyes drinking me in as a target, not a daughter. But I don't want to talk about my mom. If I do, I'll scream. If I do, I'll throw this laptop against the wall. So I'm not going to talk about my mother. I'm not going to talk about my mother. I'm not going to talk about my mother. Now, here's a question for you. When you look at your best friend, what do you think? Do you feel happiness, melancholy? Maybe that person is no longer close to you and is a stranger. Does it hurt when you catch glimpses of them? I know it does. I know exactly how you feel. You have memories with them, those you have and will cherish forever, and yet when you look at them now, after so many years of being apart, it's like looking at a stranger, like looking through a foggy mirror, as if nothing was there in the first place. Instead of what you had, there's nothing, a deep cavern of darkness and emptiness where something used to be. That was the exact feeling I had when I looked at Nick, when I tried to piece together my best friend from the splintered pieces of him I was staring at. It was dark, and yet I saw all of him, and I didn't want to. I wanted the darkness to consume us completely so I didn't have to register what I was looking at. Nicholas Castor had been one of the most attractive boys in our year, blessed with boyish curls and freckles speckling pale cheeks. Now I was looking at someone who sounded like him, smelled like him, but wasn't him. Couldn't be. The Nick I'd known since freshman year was textbook boy next door. In my blurry vision, and consumed in the darkness of overhead trees, all I saw was red where his face was supposed to be. All I saw was red, and I couldn't understand it. I couldn't understand that the figure standing in front of me was Nick, because Nick wasn't, well, he wasn't this. I rarely saw him cry, and this Nick was sobbing, his chest heaving, his breath short and panicky. My head spun when his hand snaked around my bicep, and he yanked me to the ground with a forceful tug. When my knees hit the dirt, I barely felt the impact. Lowering myself, I pressed myself into the forest floor. Nick didn't let go of me, only strengthening his rock-hard grip on my arm. "We need to stay down," he gasped out, his voice slurred and wrong. I kept getting the overwhelming urge to check him. I had to know he was okay, except when I tried, Nick hissed at me not to move. He let out a strangled breath, pulling me further into the dirt. I choked on the taste of moss and old leaves, but I was thankful to be with him, far away from what should have been my execution at the hands of her. Look, chances are the bastards figured out I escaped. In the distance, I glimpsed a searchlight illuminate the darkness, beginning to sweep the perimeter of the camp. After what felt like years of lying in the dirt, waiting for the lights to dim down, they did. And when I finally lifted my head and forced myself to look at Nick, a fresh slither of bile crawled up my throat. I lost my breath all over again. Everything I'd known was gone. His curls, which had been sheared away, leaving him half bald. The flaps of bloodied flesh that used to be Nick's cheeks almost looked like they were moving, like they were alive. His left eye hung out of its socket in almost a cartoon-like fashion. His clothes from earlier had been replaced with clinical white shorts and t-shirts, both of which were splattered red. Different hues of the colour splashed down his front. He was barefoot, his knees sinking into the mud. I was hit with a memory. The two of us and Bobby at 13 years old sitting in the dirt with a picnic laying out in front of us. I remember not caring about the state of my legs and clothes. Back then, Nick had been grinning through a mouthful of PB&J. Now, though, my friend looked so vulnerable, so childlike, like he was 13 again. I just couldn't stop staring at him. He offered me a smile which sickened me, because unlike his face, his teeth were perfect. Now, Nick had been bullied in the 4th grade for having crooked teeth. Now, however, they were straightened and pearly white, almost unnaturally white. That didn't make any sense. Whatever had happened had ruined his face and fixed his teeth. I couldn't resist. Sitting on my knees, I reached out with shaking hands and grasped his face, cradling it to make sure it was his. And it was. It was still the Nicholas Castor I'd known since freshman year. He had the same smell of cheap axe spray and the earthy, flowery aroma of the exotic plants in his bedroom. It always had been the three of us, me, Nick, and Bobby, the three musketeers. Nothing would take that away, even when I could barely recognize him anymore. Nick pulled away for a moment, like he was ashamed. But I knew Nick. I knew he would never show me that he was hurt. Ashamed. In pain, even when I knew he was. No, that wasn't him. Yeah, I know. He let out a shaky laugh and turned away. His right eye bounced below its socket, and I had to avert my gaze. If I didn't, I'd laugh or scream. I'm hideous. I'm sure if I didn't feel like I was on cloud 9 right now, I'd be freaking out. He cocked a brow. I actually look pretty cool though, right? You know, like a cyborg. He was smiling and didn't know how he was smiling, but the hysterical sobs escaping his lips told a whole different story. I felt my eyes prick with tears. I couldn't break when I was all he had at that moment. Bobby was in that building. I had no idea if she was dead or alive. But now I had to focus on Nick. I had to focus on keeping him calm, keeping him from breaking apart. Nick? I couldn't think straight, never mind speak. What had happened? Well, the words were bubbling in my throat, ready to burst out in anger and pain that someone had done this to him, that someone was going to do this to Bobby. However, I managed to hold myself. I stayed calm for his benefit and let him catch his own breath, allowing his body to grow still. I pulled off my shirt and scrunched it into a ball, gently dabbing at the bloody splotches on his face. The cool breeze tickled my bare skin and felt good, pulling me back to reality. It's going to be okay, I whispered. We'll get you help. It was a relief to be rid of the shirt which had labelled me as a defect. When I gently pressed it to Nick's right eye socket, careful not to put too much pressure, he winced and let out a soft whine, but he didn't speak. "I'm okay," he whimpered, his left eye surveying me in the dark. Neither of us spoke for a moment. I found myself lost in my own melancholy. I couldn't stop thinking about Bobby. She was a blue. She was exactly what they wanted. But Nick, he was a purple. He was wanted too. So why had they done that to him? "Addie." He took a shaky step away from me and folded his arms across his chest, his gaze on the ground. Unsteady on his feet, Nick fought to stay upright. I grabbed his arm, stealing him. He paced back and forth, his breathing growing progressively more and more erratic. "We're getting Bobby out of there, but I need you to do something for me first." I nodded, but the question was spewing from my mouth before I could stop it. I couldn't stop tears running down my face. I tried to blink them away, but they kept coming. "Nick, what did they do to you?" He held my gaze for a moment before turning around and stripping off his own shirt. Again, unlike his face, his body was perfect. Well, more than perfect. Nick had never been bothered about maintaining a figure. He was naturally thin, with a good metabolism. He didn't need to go to the gym. But under the trees, in minimal light, I saw toned back muscles. When he turned to face me, his lower torso was ripped to perfection. Again, I thought, my head spinning, why was everything else perfect except his face? It was almost a laughable sight, but I didn't laugh. Not when the boy could barely stand straight. There's something inside me," he whispered, scratching at the back of his neck. His fingernails clawed at the flesh like an animal, frenzied and desperate. You need to get it out, like right now." Before I could speak, he was pulling something from his jeans, something that glinted in the dark. Nick clenched it between his fists, his teeth gritted. "I need you to cut it out," he said. I was lucky. My machine was faulty, so it wasn't able to complete whatever it was trying to do. He gestured to his face with the blade. "That's why I'm half done, if you can even call it that." His words sent shivers rattling down my spine. My gaze went to his toned chest and perfect teeth. That's what happened. Whatever processing meant, it was full body. Nick's had gone wrong and messed his face up. I opened my mouth to ask why. Why were they doing this to us? But he was thrusting the blade into my hand. "I've tried, Addie," he choked out. "I've tried to get it out myself, but I can't fucking reach it." Letting out a hiss of frustration, Nick curled my fingers around the blade. "Some kind of chip or tracker. Something that they're inevitably gonna activate. And then we're both fucked." I found myself nodding, biting my lip to suppress a scream when his quaking fingers danced over a scar marked into his skin. The incision point, I thought. It must be. I don't know what possessed me. With the blade in my hand, I started forwards, but I couldn't do it. Even when I knew it was dangerous, that I could lose Nick at any point. His words, what he'd said, described, were sending me into a tailspin. All at once, the bottom fell out of me. I shook my head and staggered back, tripping over a rock jutting from the ground. "I can't," I squeaked. I was trying to ignore it, but my body was in fight or flight mode. I had to find Bobby. I had to find her and get her out. Before it happened to her. Well, this was all I could think. My mouth shut to a stop, a screech that was tearing from my throat. I needed to find her. The thought was driving me freaking crazy. I couldn't think of anything but Bobby. I didn't even notice I was kneeling in the dirt, my head between my knees, until I was struggling to breathe. Inhale and exhale. That's what it took. That's what was supposed to help a panic attack. But it wasn't working. I was screaming into my lap, my body shaking, my hands clawing at my hair. Seeing Nick like that and knowing what they were capable of. The people who looked after us for 18 years had thrown us like lambs to the slaughter. I couldn't breathe. I was gonna die. That's all I could think. My lungs felt starved of oxygen. My chest, it hurt. My stomach felt like it was trying to projectile into my throat. Addie. Nick's voice was a gentle murmur that I couldn't ignore. I felt his soft touch tingle across my arms, as if unsure whether to grab me or not. But he did. He gripped gently, pulling me to my feet, his sticky hands coming to cradle my face, forcing me to look at him. "You can do this," he said. And when I shook my head and tried to pull away, he tightened his grip. "I know you're scared, and you need some kind of reassuring pep talk." Nick choked out a laugh. "Trust me, I'd give you one if we had time, but we don't, Addie. Bobby's still in there, and the sooner you get this bastard thing out of me, the sooner we can go and get her and get the others out. Okay?" I realized Nick was crying, and Nick never cried. When I offered him my scrunched-up shirt to use as a gag, he shook his head. "Just do it." I complied. I had to squint to see the incision properly. When I stuck the blade in and made a small cut, he didn't even flinch. "It's okay," Nick reassured me to keep going. "I can't feel it." "Can't feel it?" I hissed out. My hand holding the scalpel was shaking. "What do you mean you can't feel it?" Nick made a shrugging motion. "They had me blissed out on anesthesia. I can't feel a thing. I haven't been able to feel for half an hour now, maybe more. Or maybe that's a good thing." I didn't reply, my gaze on the cut, slicing deeper. Blood pooled from the wound, and I blotted it with my shirt. "Nick." Swallowing hard, I focused on getting as much out of him as possible. I hated that I was doing this to him, forcing him to relive what had happened to him. "What are they doing in there?" For a moment, I thought he wasn't going to respond. All of once, it was like his whole body was reacting to my words, beginning to rattle once more. His teeth were chattering, every word caught in a hysterical breath. "It's a factory, Addie. It's a fucking factory," he whimpered. It's like a conveyor belt. We were sorted into colors, right? Red, purple, and blue. Reds were killed. The purples and blues, we were taken into that building. The blues went upstairs. Last time I saw Bobby, she was being herded away with a bunch of others. We were taken into this room. It was a bright room. It hurt my eyes. We were all told we were going to be processed." His whole body shuddered, and I paused with the scalpel for a moment. There was barely any light, so I had to squint. Well, at first I thought it was a trick in the dark to confuse me. But when I looked closer, there it was. Nick was right. Something small and metal, like a grain of rice, was sandwiched inside the cut. "It's okay." I grabbed onto his shoulders and squeezed hard, steeling him to reality. "It's okay, Nick. I'm here. Keep going," I urged him. If I could keep Nick talking, I could kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Get the tracker out of his neck and find out what the camp were doing to blues and purples. I bit so hard into my lower lip I tasted blood, which again anchored me to reality. Nick's words were sending my thoughts into a tailspin, though. Processing. That word kept propping up, and it was making me progressively more nauseous. "What does processing mean?" I whispered. "You keep saying the word processing." Nodding, Nick exhaled shakily. It was a machine," he said softly. "We were made to lie down on these chairs, like the ones at the dentist. These machines came down from the ceiling, and I couldn't stop it. I couldn't get out, so they had me tied down, and I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't fucking breathe." When his body jolted suddenly, I withdrew the scalpel from the cut where I was trying to use it to dig out the tracker. Keeping a gentle hold on his shoulder, I fought against a cry of my own. "Mine was faulty," he whispered. "It was faulty? How lucky is that, right? The purples were supposed to be fixed. We were supposed to be made perfect. With an explosive laugh, his body rattled again. They injected me with something to screw with my brain, take me to frickin' Candyland. But the thing was faulty, so all it did was fuck up my face. When Nick trailed off, I thought he was done. But after a pause, he tensed, and I felt his chest racking with sobs. I felt his legs struggling to stay upright. Oh, God damn it, I can still hear them, Addie. It was almost out. I managed to scoop up the tracker, but the incision was too small. Hear who, Nick? Them. His words then came out in a broken wail. I can still hear the sounds of blades and saws and knives and cutting. They screamed, Addie. They screamed until the shit they give us took effect. But it didn't work on me because mine was faulty. So, oh God, I had to listen to it all. When he bowed his head, I took the opportunity to pull out the chip, but it was caught on something. Well, my hands were slick with his blood, and I forced myself to stay calm. Nick was sobbing uncontrollably, and I couldn't console him. Not when he was in that state, his mind somewhere else entirely, caught in that memory. I couldn't feel anything, but I could hear it, he said stiffly. I could hear what they were doing to me. I could hear the blades slicing into my skin and ripping away my flesh, tearing up my lips and my hair, scraping my freckles and my flaws, the spots I've had since birth, even my eye. They were doing something to me, Addie. They were trying to make me look, well, like Bobby, like the Blues. They were trying to make me perfect, just like them. I've got it. Oh, I've got it. I let out a relieved breath, pulling out the tracker. Pinched between my thumb and forefinger, it was tiny, a blue light emitting from the base. When I got a proper look at it, it reminded me of a bug, and I swore there were tiny metal antennae sticking out the front. I expected Nick to reply, but he didn't. He stayed very still, his head bowed. I don't think he even noticed I'd gotten the chip out. I crushed it between my fingers and dropped it onto the ground. When I gently turned him around, Nick's gaze was on the ground. His voice was a low murmur, like he was reliving it. They were supposed to fix me, he whispered, but instead, they turned me into this. He shuddered. I was waiting for them to scrape the flesh off my bones, but they stopped, and I was conscious enough to know what was happening. I got out of my restraints when the machine stopped moving. I think the process was done, or at least it was supposed to be done. When I got up, I saw the others. Oh, they were lying down like me, but they were out of it. And they weren't like me. They weren't mutilated and bloody like me. I checked everyone. Noah Hargreaves and Cass Blake, Danny Rue, all of them. They were just lying there after fucked up plastic surgery. And they were like nothing I'd seen before. They were perfect. I cut in, and his head jerked up in surprise. He nodded. Yeah. Nick swiped at his good eye. Yeah, they were perfect. Then, he continued, I ran. I yanked off one of the blades from one of those machines, and I made a break for it. There were no guards, at least. They weren't in the room I was in, so I ran and found you. When he caught my eye, Nick seemed to snap out of it. Blinking rapidly, he scratched up his face like he was coming out of a trance. His hand went to the back of his neck, grazing the cut. Did you get it out? I nodded. It's gone, I said shakily. Reminded me of a bug. A bug? Yeah, it looked like it had antennae. Something had been bothering me, and it seemed that it was the best time to say it. Those trackers, were they inside us before camp? Or were you inserted with one when you were taken? He shrugged, running a hand through what was left of his hair. That's what I was afraid of. It would make sense of how they knew exactly where we were when we were planning to bail town. Swallowing hard, I gingerly pressed my fingers to the back of my neck. How did you know there was a tracker inside you? That machine must have caught my neck, he muttered. All I know is I felt something moving. Moving? Thinking back to the tracker, my skin crawled. Nick let out a sharp exhale. He looked like he might say something before what sounded like the love child of a dentist drill and car alarm slammed into my skull. The force of it nearly shook me to my knees, but Nick's grasp held me upright. I slammed my hands over my ears. Oh, fuck, Nick yelled over the alarm. That's the alarm. They're probably looking for me. His hand travelled up my arm, and he pulled me forwards. If we're going to get Bobby out, we're going now, okay? The guards should be distracted, so if we keep a low profile, we should be fine. Before I could answer, he was wrapping me into a hug, and well, I'd missed those hugs. I thought I'd be hugging him like when we left for college and parted ways, but that life of mine was now gone. It'll be okay. We're getting Bobby, and we're going away from here, all of us. Well, I don't know. We'll change our names and live in LA or something. Nick chuckled. I'll make it as a rock star. You two will be models or TV stars, something cool like that, I was already clinging on to his promises of a life away from Aceville, one of our own. Right. I found myself spluttering, stumbling in the dark. The alarms were still blaring, branches scratching at my bare legs. But I was on a beach somewhere, at least in my mind, Miami or California, under a crystal blue sky. Nick was on his knees searching for something now. I stood and wrapped my arms around myself to keep warm. I wouldn't think about Bobby. That's what I kept telling myself. I wouldn't think about what Nick had gone through. And if that was what processing meant for purples, what did it mean for blues? Yeah, we'll live in one of those fancy apartments, I shouted, pressing my hands over my ears to block out the screeching alarms. We'll get jobs or go to college, Nick continued in sharp breaths. He picked up my discarded shirt and threw it at me. Wear it inside out until we get inside. That way they won't clock you're a red. Nick pulled on his own shirt, and I had no choice but to do what he said. My shirt was damp with Nick's blood, but I forced it over my head anyway, grabbing his hand. I didn't want to let go. I was scared that if I did, I'd lose him, for real this time. Not just the memories of him, the face I'd grown up with, no, all of him. Nick broke out into a grin, and for a moment I didn't feel helpless. The crushing weight on my chest lifted slightly. What? He gestured to his face, cocking a brow. Does it look bad? Opening my mouth to try and say no, try and sugarcoat it, I realized he didn't deserve that. You look fucking horrific, I managed to get out, even when tears were welling in my eyes again. Though Nick just shoved me playfully, giving my hand a squeeze. It hurt me that he was trying to reassure me and keep me from splintering, not caring about himself. But part of me knew he wouldn't allow himself to break, because if he did, so would I. And we would never get Bobby out. Shooting me another grin with those two white teeth, Nick started forwards, pulling me with him. See, that's the Addie I know. I kept to his side as we marched through the thicket of trees. When we approached the camp once again, the top of the building poking through the trees, Nick stumbled. I'd noticed he'd gotten clumsy-footed, but, well, he was struggling to walk straight without my help. Nick, I grabbed his hand so tight I felt my nails slice into his flesh. Can you walk? He shot me a pained smile. Barely. Slowly we edged towards the building. The bodies of the dead kids were being picked up and thrown in a pile, like they were trash. With one hand covering his severed eye and the other clutching mine, Nick pulled me inside. It reminded me of a school mixed with a hospital. Every wall was white, the floor matching. I was immediately blinded by bright light. I tried not to look at Nick, but it was impossible not to. He stood out in the allure, his once handsome face reduced to ugly strips of flesh, his right eye hanging cartoonishly out of its socket. The freckles I'd known since I was a kid were gone, scraped into oblivion, along with the rest of the memory of him. It was a long, narrow corridor that seemed to go on forever, twisting and turning. We made our way slowly, ducking down when guards passed ahead. I could hear voices getting closer. Nick pulled me to his side, his breath warm in my ear. If I can remember correctly, it's 3 floors up. When I was taken to be processed, I overheard one of them say, "Blues are on the 3rd floor." He gasped out. "They're taken to be polished and straightened out, while purples are fixed." He used air quotes with one hand. "And reds," he trailed off. "I'm sorry about, you know." "It's fine," I whispered, though it wasn't fine. I felt wrong, filthy, my muddy feet tainting perfect white marble flooring. I was the defect. I was supposed to die outside by my mother's hand. Nick, strangely, looked like he belonged, even if his clothes were spattered red. "How do you know so much?" I said in a sharp breath as we digressed across the corridor. Nick seemed to know where he was going. "I was supposed to be out of it," he murmured, pulling me further into an expanse of white. "But they couldn't even do that right. So when I couldn't scream anymore, I focused on their voices. I focused on anything that wasn't the blade slicing into my face. Drills and saws and blades scooping my eye out and slicing into layer after layer of skin." He broke out into a shaky hiss. "They said blues were being processed upstairs, and reds were ready for incineration." Incineration? Something cold slithered down my spine. The reds weren't just killed, they were wiped away. No traces of them left. "We need to get you help," I managed to whisper. Nick laughed, but it wasn't his laugh, the one I knew. No, it was harsh and twisted. "Like I said, they pumped me with enough drugs so I didn't feel anything. Pretty sure it's going to wear off soon, though." I spotted a trash can overflowing with something, and when we got closer I realized what it was I was looking at. I was seeing bloodied clothes stained blue and purple, shirts and jeans, dresses all drenched in red, but they still had telltale traces of spray paint rings. Nick grabbed a sweater and pants for himself and a bundle of light pink for me. "Put these on, quickly." He struggled to pull off his bloodied shirt, his eye bouncing from his socket. Reminded me of a cartoon I'd seen as a kid. He straightened out the sweater, wincing at the scarlet stains. "Look, if we're going to get Bobby out of here, then we act like purples." I tried not to think about the clothes I was trying on. Sadie Lily had been wearing them. A light pink blouse. Oh, the purple ring had ruined it. The material was damp in my hands, warm and wet between my fingers. I had to swallow down the bile that was stuck at the back of my throat. All my fingers itched to look through the pile, look for the dress that Bobby had been wearing before she was taken. It was her favorite. I'd been there in the clothes store when she'd insisted on trying it on, spinning around for me while Nick pretended to snap photos with his imaginary camera. I was trapped in that memory, in phantom laughter, before I was suddenly pulled back to the present, back to my reality. I was playing with the seam of Sadie Lily's blouse when Nick hurried to what looked like a classroom door. He pressed his face against the glass. "This is where I was taken," he said stiffly. Hesitantly, I joined him. There was a sign printed on the door in caps. "Out of order. Sterilization in progress." Inside there was a room of a dozen dentist-like chairs with the Velcro restraints and metal contraptions hanging over them, just like he described. All it took was me seeing a splash of red on the ground, and then I was seeing it everywhere, splattered over each headrest and smears on the floor. Blood. There was blood everywhere. I had to look away, swallowing the urge to barf once more. An eruption of screams rang out further down the hall, and Nick let out a hiss, but I didn't want to look. I couldn't. I recognized the voices. Ones I'd known my whole life. Names I knew. Faces. And I knew their laughter. I knew how they sounded when they'd had too many beers. I waited to hear her cry. Her scream because, well, I knew it. I knew her scream when she suffered night terrors, the two of us enveloped in my bedsheets, wrapped in our own world. Ignoring the screams as best I could, I focused on the room in front of us. What are those things? I didn't realize I was trying to pull the door open until warm hands entangled with mine and pulled me away. Hey! Nick's grip wasn't soft or reassuring. It hurt, but it was enough to pull me from the depths of despair that I was sinking into. His voice sounded strange, like it was a million miles away, caught up in white noise. Addie, hey, Addie, you can't lose it now, okay? We're getting her out of here. Say it with me. We're getting her out of here, and we're going to get away, okay? I nodded like a child, my chest heaving with sobs. When Nick pulled me through a door at the end of the corridor and then up a flight of steps, I could barely move my legs. Addie, talk to me, he murmured, quickening his pace. We're getting her out. We're getting her out, I gritted out. But then I was looking down at Sadie's blouse, clawing at the front of it. This is blood, I choked, pulling at the material. Sadie, is she dead? I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to believe that Sadie was dead. I did not want to believe it. But Nick didn't reply. Let's go. The second floor was livelier. Men and women in suits were walking up and down, carrying talkies, murmuring to each other. A woman had K.J. Leonhardt over her shoulder, though he wasn't moving. I saw something that looked almost black in contrast to his white skin, streaks of it running down his neck and the back of his t-shirt. His body was limp. Wrong. Loose. It bounced on the woman's back, and it was then I realized the boy was dead. But he wasn't a red. He wasn't a defect. I would have known. I would have known his face. Nick grabbed me and pulled me back, flattening the two of us against the wall. Don't move, he whispered. Don't speak. Don't breathe. When I pressed my hand over my mouth, I immediately felt warmth. It ran down my face in hot rivulets, staining my fingers. When droplets hit the white floor, I scrubbed them away with my foot. I hadn't realized my head had started to hurt, a dull ache beginning to crawl across the back of my skull. Oh, Nick was quick, dragging me down the corridor and somehow managing to keep his eye in his socket. He peered into the glass of each door while I stumbled along, my head spinning, blood sputtering from my nose. I was fading in and out of reality, the pain pounding in my ears and nose, at the back of my throat, when Nick's hand became detached from mine. Wait. He stopped outside one door, peering inside. I staggered to a stop, applying pressure to my nose, but it wasn't stopping. What is it? Nick let out a shuddery breath. See for yourself. Inside the room, I found myself looking inside what was a classroom-like setting. The blues were just like Nick had said. They were perfected of flaws, anything that made them who they were. Now, they were dolls. I looked for emotion on their faces, some kind of expression, but there was none. Dressed in the same clothes as Nick, they sat at wooden desks, while a guard loomed over each one. They faced a white wall where a bigger version of the film we'd watched on the bus was being projected on the wall. I recognized those same colors, and they hurt my head. I had to look away. They were a lot brighter than what I'd seen, bathing each face in crimson red and sickly yellow, followed by blue. Red, yellow, blue, green. Repeat. Nick straightened up. So this is some kind of school, he muttered. Purples are taken to be fixed downstairs and blues, since they're already perfect, are put in front of these colors again. But why? I whispered. What are they doing to them? I searched his expression for an answer. After all, Nick was smart. He was the smartest out of the three of us. At first I was worried he'd been affected by the colours too, but then he gripped my hand. Fuck. Nick let out a whine. Is that... Addie, is that who I think it is? Following his gaze, I scanned each student's face until I saw her. I saw Bobby. I saw Bobby, and all of me shattered. I can't really explain what it was like. I felt like I was swallowing glass, like I was being pulled deep down into the depths of the ocean, choking on ice water. Nick was there, but I couldn't feel him. I couldn't feel his steely grip, his warm fingers. I couldn't smell the cheap axe spray and the stink of his exotic plants. He was there, and he wasn't. Instead, I was drowning. And I don't want to say what I saw, at least not now, because it hurts. It hurts just thinking about it. I can still feel what I felt. I can feel my throat closing up, my chest tightening, my heart pounding in my ears. I have to stop. Like I told you at the start, I have to take breaks. I have to steady myself. I found out the horrifying secret behind the mandatory summer camp in my town. It took away my friends, or at least how I knew them. It's been days, I know. Don't know what's wrong with me. Every time I sit down to write our story, I have to take days to recover. Like I said, it's hard. It's fucking hard to relive what happened to the doomed class of 2020. What happened to Bobby and Nick. I don't want to. Got halfway through the last part, and I had to press my head into my lap and take deep breaths. I have to steady myself, take control. I keep thinking, maybe this was a bad idea. As much as I want to revisit what happened to us, to feel the emotions and immerse myself in the memories, like I said, it fucking hurts. Even a year later, in what feels like a whole new world to what was Aceville, my home, it still hurts. It's going to take my time with parts of my own sanity, because I have a lot to say. A lot happened after all. I want to tell you everything. When I last left off, Nick and I had found Bobby inside the facility. She sat right at the back of the classroom, stiff in her seat, her hands on the desk in front of her. I expected Bobby to look different. I expected not to recognize her after she'd been polished and perfected. Except she looked exactly the same. Her blonde hair fell in wisps down her back. Apart from flickering eyes following the colors flashing erratically, Bobby wasn't moving. I didn't realize I was grasping the handle until Nick gently pulled me away. "We need to think about this," he said. "If we waltz in there and try and grab her that way, we'll get caught. I don't know about you, but being turned into a zombie or whatever the fuck they're doing isn't really on my to-do list right now. I wish you put that ounce of intelligence into your studies." The voice sent me twisting around, grabbing Nick's arm on instinct. Mr. Fuller was standing with his arms folded, an easy smile on his lips. The moment he caught sight of my friend's face, however, his eyes darkened. The man tottered and started forwards. "Oh, Nicholas, I do apologize for the mishap. We've been looking for you everywhere. We were starting to think the worst." "Get away from us," Nick spat out, tugging me back. But any fight he had died away when the teacher enveloped him in a hug. I stood, frozen, while the man caressed Nick's cheeks like the boy was his son. Nick didn't move, letting the man's fingers graze over what was left of his face, fingernails skimming over strips of bloodied flesh. Mr. Fuller's touch was gentle. I was informed your processing was cut short due to a fault, resulting in the state of you, and you even managed to pull out the neuron. Young man, the Pollux procedure aims to make you the perfect human, a soldier. However, it seems something must have gone wrong. He cocked his head to the side, studying the boy like he was a piece of meat. Your brain responded almost perfectly to the initial programming, so we'll have to fix your face once again. I'm sure it won't take long. It's nothing the Pollocks can't sort out." Nick stumbled back with a snort. "Are you serious? Do you think I'm going to willingly walk into that frickin' slaughterhouse again?" The teacher's expression didn't waver. "You're a good stock and a potential recruit. So yes, Nicholas, you will be fixed. Then you, like the rest of your classmates, will be programmed." "Yeah, that's not going to happen." Grabbing my hand and pulling me to his side, Nick snarled at the teacher. I stumbled with him. My vision was blurry. Everything seemed almost unreal. The doors on the hallway wavered like I was staring at an optical illusion. My head was pounding, and it was getting progressively harder to stifle my nose. But Nick's grasp was tight. "We're taking Bobby, and we're going. Fuck whatever MK Ultra shit you're doing here. We want no part in it." Well, the teacher scoffed. "I'm surprised you know of that experiment, Nick." His gaze then snapped to me. "Miss Calstone." His expression twisted. I'd never known this side of him. He was our sophomore math teacher. The harshest I'd seen him was yelling at me for getting an equation wrong. Now it was something different. His eyes were ice cold and cruel, empty. Like the teacher I'd known for most of my life in and out of school was a facade. Forgive me for asking, but shouldn't you be in the incinerator with other defects? Nick's sharp exhalation of breath was enough to anchor me, enough for me to claw through the whirlwind of thoughts in my head. All I could think about was Bobby. All I could fucking think about was how the teacher had looked at Nick. Mr. Fuller's words hurt. Looking at him, I felt ashamed. I felt wrong for being a defect, like I'd failed this bastard. I wasn't like Bobby or Nick or Sadie Lily or Danny Rue. No, I was a red, a failure that should have been long gone with the rest of the Reds. Felt pathetic standing in front of my teacher, blood oozing from my nose and down my chin, tainting my lips. It was all I could taste, like I'd swallowed a coin. I caught the disgust in his eyes and forced the words from my mouth, even when they were tangled on my tongue. I still wanted to know Nick's fate. I still needed to know what was going to happen to him and Bobby. "What are you doing to us?" I demanded in a breath which almost hurt to inhale. I gestured to the door, that the Blues were inside. We deserve an explanation." Meaning I wanted to know what was happening to Bobby in that room in front of us. Meaning I needed a freaking explanation. Well, Mr. Fuller curled his lip. "I don't respond to defects," he murmured. "However, I will humor you." He took a step towards us. I staggered back. More red splattered the floor. My hand slapped to my nose once more. I couldn't stop it. It hurt, a pain I'd never felt before, like my body was shutting down, my organs rejecting me one by one. "You're bleeding, Adeline." The teacher's voice was soft, and for a moment, a single moment, I thought he'd snap back to the man that I knew. But I was too hopeful. I was too freaking naive to think he hadn't been a monster all along. Mr. Fuller straightened up with a sigh. "However, I expected, Adeline. Defects are not expected to live long after being exposed to the green light video. That'd give you around a few days. Maybe a week or two if you're lucky. Well, really, it depends on your body. We've had defects who we can use for spare parts. Well, they can last up to several months. Our most recent was in our 2019 class." What kind of bullshit is that?" Nick spluttered. He was in denial. I know he was. He was in denial that what the teacher was saying was the truth. That I was dying. That's what he was telling me. I was dying, and it made sense. My body was rejecting whatever it was I'd been subjected to. If I could have blocked out his words, I would have. I would have screamed until my throat was raw, until Mr. Fuller's voice was somewhere else entirely. I would have pressed my hands against my ears. But I didn't. "The green light video," I repeated, but Nick was talking over me. What do you mean she's dying? His laugh was hysterical. I could tell the anesthesia was wearing off. Nick's teeth were gritted, his good eye wide and frenzied. He was looking for a way out, for a way to get to Bobby. But she was trapped in that room. Right then, Bobby felt 1,000,000 miles away. It's a fucking nosebleed. A nosebleed, Mr. Castor. Mr. Fuller cocked a brow and chuckled. Your lack of intelligence has always astounded me. I can't say I'll miss you when we empty you completely. His words, they weren't fully registering in my mind. I was in too much pain. I was in too much pain and Bobby was there. She was right in front of me and I couldn't get to her. I couldn't see if she was okay. I couldn't see if she was exactly what Mr. Fuller had said. Empty. Mr. Fuller pointed to the window. A smile was spread across his lips. He was smug. Inside that room is humanity's future. Our untainted youth. They're beautiful, are they not? Aceville is let's say a breeding ground for new recruits. We're given roles which fit a controlled environment until recruits reach the age of 18 years old, where they're taken to be processed. Well, they're sorted into 2 categories. Blues, who need no modifications, are taken to be programmed and emptied. The purples, as you can see from Nicholas, are put through the Pollux procedure, where we rid them of imperfections and polish them to improve their appearance. Mr. Fuller cleared his throat, his gaze snapping to Nick. Well, of course, our technology can sometimes malfunction. Nick's shaking hand crept up my arm and gripped hard enough to elicit a shriek in my throat. What about Addie? Why is she a defect? He demanded. He was trembling, and I wanted to wrap my arms around him. I wanted to do something that would give him some kind of reassurance, some kind of hope. But we didn't have that. Mr. Fuller was delivering our death sentence, and I couldn't move. I was in too much pain to protest, to start screaming like I wanted. All I could do was focus on standing and leaning my weight into Nick. Mr. Fuller tottered at the state of me, at my efforts to stifle my hemorrhaging nose. Goodness, child. He rolled his eyes and pulled out a scrap of toilet paper and threw it at me. I ignored it. Clean yourself up. You're embarrassing yourself. As you already saw, a test video is exposed to all of you upon arriving at the facility, so defects can be picked out and eradicated. He shrugged. No humans are perfect. That includes Aceville recruits. Bad eggs are inevitable despite our best efforts. But that's not fair, Nick yelled. What, the Reds, those kids weren't submitting to your mind control shit, so you killed them? He shook his head, and I pretended not to see the tears run down his cheeks. You killed them. You're a fucking murderer. You can't justify this. Mr. Fuller rolled his eyes like he was dealing with a petulant child. Nicholas, it's a lot more complicated than that. Like you, Adeline was, of course, supposed to be subjugated. Believe me, she would make a wonderful recruit. She's one of our top students, a truly brilliant mind. We expected her to pass the green light test with flying colors and be put into the Pollux procedure. However, it appears her brain isn't as strong as we thought. Mr. Fuller shot me a sympathetic smile. Oh, it's not her fault. We expect defects every year, 2020 class included. It's murder, Nick screamed. His voice slammed into my skull, and I felt his pain, the agony writhing through him. Do you not hear yourself? You're killing us because you can't control us. Mr. Fuller simply settled the boy with a frown. Mr. Castor, you're in pain. Because of you, Nick choked out. You did this to me. You fucked up my face because... What? He spluttered out a sarcastic laugh. Because I'm not your ideal pretty boy, huh? Wow, I'm so sorry. Nick, I said stiffly. Let him talk. Mr. Fuller nodded. Young man, you're failing to see the bigger picture. The teacher gestured to the door, to Bobby, who I couldn't bring myself to look at. Our class of 2020 are perhaps our best year yet. We only had 12 defects, 11 of which have been taken care of. His gaze then landed on me, well, excluding Adeline, of course. He chuckled. Now, the rest are, of course, salvageable if fixed, which is why you, Mr. Castor, will be put through the Pollux procedure once again, followed by programming and, ultimately, emptying. Well, the teacher must have caught my expression. His lip curled. Think of yourselves as skins, as unsettling as that sounds. Aceville creates soldiers, or skins if you like. We raise you from birth, and of course you develop normal human relationships, such as bonding with your mother or making friends when you're older. This was all, of course, a part of developing the brain and maturing the body. Once successfully processed, our new recruits are sent into the world. Some go to prestigious colleges, others to start families in suburbia. They become our eyes and ears, having spaces in every room of importance across the globe. Our youth become flies on the wall, impossible to catch. Nick let out a breath. I've seen Titans. I know exactly what you crazy fucks are doing. You're creating perfect white picket fence citizens with a trigger switch. And then they're your obedient slaves. Mr. Fuller shook his head. Well, not quite, Nicholas. However, I do like your input. He shook his head like Nick was a child acting out. What you're seeing in there is far from the end of processing. Once our recruits' brains have been programmed and cleansed of the temporary consciousness that they've held for the past 18 years, they're then inserted with what you, Mr. Castor, may call a sleeper. At the corner of my eye, Bobby was still there, and the longer she was in there, the closer I was to losing her, and losing Nick. The teacher's words might as well have been a different language. I couldn't understand him. No, I didn't want to understand him. I didn't want to register the truth staring at me right in the face. We weren't kids finishing our senior year and heading off to college. We were shells, empty bodies. We were the pretty faces for their mindless drones. I opened my mouth to speak, but Mr. Fuller got there first, like he was reading me, just like my mother. No, Adeline, it's not cruel, he said. And that's exactly what I was thinking. Cruel. This is cruel. This is so cruel, so inhumane, so wrong. How could they do this? How could they think this was okay? It is, necessary, the man continued. We're not taking children who have parents, nor the homeless. We thought about it, but the idea of taking a child from their family and taking away their humanity seems, well, cruel. He sent me a quick smile. The purpose of Aceville is to create freshly made recruits brought into the world for the very purpose of serving us. Children who were created to lose their humanity upon turning 18. Defects are scrapped and potentials are processed. This is not new. Aceville's children were being processed decades before you two and your classmates were even an idea. Nick shot me a panicked look. My dad, Nick whispered. Wait, he's not a part of this, right? Because I'd know. I'd fucking know if my dad was a fake. I'd know. Mr. Fuller cut him off with a harsh laugh. This is why we empty you, he muttered. Far too much emotion to deal with. The human brain works best without attachments, emotions, and memories. They weaken it. With our recruits being teenagers in their late blossoming, that's why emptying is vital. We take you when you're, let's say, ripe, when your brains and bodies are approaching full development, and we can insert our program, which of course converts you into soldiers. Slaves, Nick spat. You mean slaves? Mr. Castor, what exactly did you expect? Mr. Fuller murmured. You're failing every subject in school. You have no talents, no work ethic. All you can do is kick a ball around. That wasn't true. Nick was smart in his own way. He was failing math, sure. He'd slept through most of his classes. But I knew he was excelling in English and science. He could relay animal facts straight from memory and was almost fluent in Japanese after starting classes when he was 14. But Mr. Fuller didn't see any of that. He only saw test scores and GPAs. The teacher took a slow step towards us, but I didn't move. Did you really think you were going to go to college, huh? No, Nicholas. What you're going to be is a soldier, one of our brightest and strongest. You'll follow orders without a single hesitation, and you will kill on command. Because that's what you were made to be. Obedient. You understand me? Soldiers, Nick repeated. I could tell by his tone that he was stalling. Do you mean like the ones on Call of Duty? Mr. Fuller laughed. Once again, I will not miss your temporary consciousness. Benjamin Castor and Jasmine Calstone's jobs were simple. They were to raise the two of you until you turned 18. Any attachments formed were for development purposes only. His gaze slid to me. Well, it appears Jasmine failed to do her job properly. As I've said multiple times, your brain is too weak, Adeline, which is indeed a shame. I was looking forward to fixing you. You have quite an odd face. Not unattractive, but not quite attractive either. Your eyes are far too big for your face, and your nose is deformed. When you smile, your teeth are crooked. As for your body, you have an hourglass figure, which we want, of course. Your imperfections are your face, I'm afraid, which we'd easily be able to fix in the Pollux procedure. Mr. Fuller's words were like needles sticking into my spine. And now look at you, he continued in a scoff. Mr. Castor's face is a mess indeed, but somehow I can't take my eyes off you, Adeline. You're a missed opportunity, a defect with so much potential, and then you have the audacity to step into our facility, dirtying our floors with your filthy feet. Do not think I'll take pity on you. You're nothing but a shell which will not be filled. Instead, like the others, you'll be disposed of. Or, who knows? We may keep you for spare parts. Addie, Nick was murmuring over the white noise buzzing in my ears. Don't listen to him. Don't fucking listen to him, okay? What did I tell you? We're getting out of here. Me, you, and Bobby. Now say it with me. Where did I say we're gonna go? His voice was growing more and more hysterical, and I couldn't respond to him. If I did, I'd give myself hope. Hope that we would escape. Hope that I wouldn't lose them. Well, I couldn't. I wanted to, but I wasn't going to sugarcoat our reality. Nick and Bobby weren't getting away, and I was going to die. Like I should have, in the dirt and rain next to Summer Forest at the hands of my mother's gun pinpointed between my eyes. Adeline, you're smart enough to understand me, Mr. Fuller said over Nick's frantic muttering. You're not the first defect. You won't be the last. We can't control how the brain reacts to the initial program, only nurturing your minds in your child and teenagehood, in hopes that you'll submit. Words. What he was saying was just words. Words that were cutting off and being sucked into oblivion. Imperfections are common. We knew from your birth. Well, I felt like agreeing. He was right, I was imperfect. I was ugly. I was bleeding. My body was rejecting what I was made for. All of the Reds, they'd died because they weren't fit for the program. They'd lived lives and aspired for college, a life away from Aceville, only for it to be cut short. Aceville wasn't a town. It was a controlled environment, a factory that had taken Clara Danvers and classes before her. It had taken the classes of 2017, 2018, and so on, and converted them into mindless drones, emptying them of everything they were ever going to be. And that was Nick's fate. Bobby's fate. Mr. Fuller clicked his tongue. Well, Adeline, it's been a pleasure. Sure you'd much rather die painlessly than wait until your brain pops like a grapefruit. I can see that it's already happening. He cocked his head. Does it hurt? You seem to be in the early stages of an intracranial hemorrhage. Tell me, are you feeling sick and lightheaded? Don't answer him, Nick gritted out. But I was already seeing stars. I was clinging on to the last parental figures I had. Yes, I whispered, with the gutter of my throat. The teacher hummed. Don't worry, Miss Calston. I shall take you to the medical department. Instead of receiving our usual red treatment, it'll be a simple shot, and there'll be no more pain. That's what you want. No more pain. His words almost felt like pain medication, like Tylenol being injected directly into my veins. Yes, I wanted to cry out. Yes, that's what I wanted. I just wanted the pain to go away. I just wanted it to stop. I wanted it to stop. God, I wanted it to stop. I wanted the bleeding to stop, crimson bubbling from my nose, hot and wet, dripping down my chin. The pain in my head, like thunderclaps, like someone was slamming a brick into the back of my skull. Yeah, I wanted it to fucking stop. I wanted it to stop. No, wait, hold on. Can we just talk about this? Nick's voice was a soft croak, barely audible. I held onto him with everything I had, but my grasp was slipping. My vision was blurry. I had to keep blinking to keep focus. You can fix her, right? The teacher hummed. I'm sorry, what was that, Mr. Castor? Addie, Nick spat. He pulled me closer to him, his grip tightening. You can fix her. You said you could fix her. Mr. Fuller cocked his head, drinking me in. I was suddenly hyper-aware of how truly imperfect I was, well, compared to Nikki, Bobby, and the others. Perhaps her face, and maybe her body. Though the evidence is clear, Nick. Look at the state of her. She'll not survive the process. You know that. Mr. Fuller's eyes darkened. Oh, perhaps you're in denial because she's a friend of yours. Young man, the very concept of friendships and relationships will be wiped clean from your mind. You'll no longer feel for Adeline, Robin, or anyone in this temporary life of yours. Emotions are our weakness, Mr. Castor. They hold you back. When you're free of them, you'll feel so much better. No, you can, Nick cried out, ignoring the man's scathing words, even when I knew they were slowly killing him. Well, he kept a poker face. Can't you do something? Surely with all your crazy technology you could, I don't know, tweak her poor sad pathetic brain, right? I mean, you know Addie, you've known her all this time. You know she'd be perfect. Well, if Nick's fingernails weren't practically slicing into my bare flesh on my arm, I still would have picked up his signal. I'd forgotten about how much of a good actor he was. The teacher seemed to take the bait, though. Mr. Castor, perhaps we should talk elsewhere. Be happy to give you the logistics. So you can save her, yeah? That's what you're saying, right? Nick detached his hand from mine, and I knew it was a goodbye. I knew it was a last resort, at least in his mind. I wanted to grab for it once more and hold on. He was the only thing I had left, or at least was still in reach. I watched him stumble over to the teacher, like he was giving himself in, surrendering to his fate. In my deteriorating vision, I was only able to see the two of them come together, before the knuckles of Nick's fists were slamming into the teacher's nose. Asshole, Nick spat. You're not touching me. Mr. Fuller stumbled back, caught off guard. Nick spun around and lunged for me. I felt his hands barely graze mine before fingers were scalping what hair he had left and yanking him back with a vicious pull. I was losing my breath once again, and I was reaching out to grab Nick myself. I couldn't lose him. That's all I could think. I couldn't lose him like I'd lost Bobby. Well, Mr. Fuller was fast, though. Of course he was. He was wrapping his arms around Nick's waist before the boy could throw himself into a run with me. Go, Nick yelled, struggling in the man's snake-like grip. Get Bobby out of here. Come back for me. When Mr. Fuller yanked Nick's head back, he cried out, his expression frenzied. I looked past the state of his face, and I saw my best friend. Don't let him turn me into a white picket fence freak, he whimpered. Promise me, Addie. I promise. The words were in my throat, but I couldn't say them. It was like watching Clara all over again. Stumbling back, I fought to stay upright. Ah! Nick snarled like a wild animal, struggling violently. Get off me. I want to see my dad. Do you hear me? I want to see my dad. His gaze landed on me then. Addie, he yelled louder. You'll get me and Bobby out, and we'll make a life someplace, all right? I'll be a rock star, and we'll have our own apartment near the beach. We'll be okay. Promise me, okay? Please. You're all I have. Please, Addie. I stopped, faltering, my head spinning, but I didn't get the chance to reply. I didn't get the chance to make that promise, even when the words were tangled on my tongue, ready to spew like bath. Nick was already limp in the man's grip, though I had no idea how he'd been knocked out so fast. Maybe it was my vastly deteriorating vision, but to me it looked like Nick was there 1 second, begging me with his good eye to promise him something that we both knew wasn't happening, and then he wasn't. My best friend dropped to the ground like his puppet strings had been severed, blood smearing from the back of his neck and face. The teacher gathered the boy into his arms with a gentle precision, barely paying any attention to me. I couldn't look at Nick. Drooping from Mr. Fuller's arms, a tangle of limbs, he looked so helpless, vulnerable. His face was sandwiched into the man's jacket, probably to keep his dislocated eye stable. It's weird. It almost looked to me like the teacher was treating Nick like his son, like he cared. Like Nick wasn't just another cog in Aceville's machine. When he turned around to walk away, I started towards him on shaky legs. The hallway around me was topsy-turvy, the lights far too bright. I wanted to hurt him, like he'd hurt all of us. I wanted to make him hurt like I was hurting, like Nick and Bobby. I expected the man to call for backup, but he didn't, only settling me with a wary look. Bringing unconscious Nick to his chest, he surveyed my best friend with a sigh. Isn't he beautiful? He murmured with a wistful smile. I'm so proud of this year's class. They'll be wonderful. You're a monster, I gritted out. Mr. Fuller hummed. He glanced up at me, his eyes glinting with amusement. What are you going to do, huh? He murmured. You going to attack me? Save your friend? Miss Cowstone, you are dying. You have no leg to stand on. When I couldn't answer, when I was trying to figure out a way to save Nick, my thoughts cotton candy. The teacher just sighed. Go, Adeline, he said, gesturing behind me. I doubt your body will survive the night, so you're not much of a threat to us. I'm tired of chasing you kids around. However, I will be forced to quicken your stoop to mortality if you intervene. You may see Nicholas as a friend, and I can understand that. But he's valuable stock and will be processed immediately. When I didn't move, when I couldn't move, he tilted his head to the side. Such a waste, he muttered. If I were you, I'd start running. I know several people, including your mother, who have already put you forward for spare parts. Bobby, I whispered, just tell me, is she... Trailing off, I choked on the rest. Mr. Fuller, however, seemed to understand. Robin is being programmed as we speak, he said. She was one of our first blues to be emptied. His words set something off inside me, an ignition of pain and helplessness pulling me deeper and deeper into despair. And so I ran. I should have stayed. I should have attacked him. I knew what I was going to do in my head. I was going to scoop his eyes out with my fingers, just like he'd done to Nick. I was going to grab the nearest sharp object and mutilate him. I could see it in the mess of my mind. I was diving forwards and stabbing the blade into his eye. Blood spurted, almost cartoonishly. I didn't stop until he was dead, until he was a pulpy mass of scarlet pooling at my feet. But I didn't. I was a fucking coward. I left him. I let him take Nick. I let him take Bobby. Outside, the bodies of the Reds were gone, but their bags and shoes were still there. Tripping over them, I dived into the trees, just as a wave of voices started up. I didn't stop running until I was deep in the thicket of brush, stumbling through the pitch dark. My hand was still pressed over my nose, trying to stifle the blood flow, but it wasn't stopping. And this time I didn't have Nick to hold on to. My nose wouldn't stop. It wouldn't stop, and I couldn't stop it. My head hurt. My body hurt. But I kept running, like Clara, like every year following. Even when all I could think of was that I didn't belong in this world. I wasn't made to do everything I wanted to do. I wasn't made to have a family and friends that loved me. I was made to be a weapon, a doll, a puppet. I was made to hurt people. And I couldn't even do that right. I waited to die. Curled up under the stars, I waited for my body to give up on me. I waited to bleed out like the other Reds. Except I didn't have the mercy of a painless death, a gunshot to the head. I was forced to wallow in my own pain and wait for my brain to shut down. Thought about a lot of things that night, but none of which I can write down without reliving some of the most painful memories I've ever experienced. I do not want to feel that agony again. Unlike the physical pain racking my body, tearing me apart from the inside, this was in my mind. It was a voice. A small voice that sounded like me whispering all my insecurities, growing louder and louder until I was screeching into the dirt, begging to die. I begged the sky, and it ignored me. I wrapped my head in my arms and forced myself to stop breathing, and my lungs to give in. Someone must have been playing a sick joke because I survived. Daylight. Daylight, and I was still alive. Oh, my head hurt, my whole body ached, but I was still alive. I survived to live another sunrise, cotton candy clouds dancing across a crystal sky. It was a sky I didn't want to see, not when I knew what had happened to Nick and Bobby. Don't know how long I slept, drifting in and out of reality. At points, I was aware. I was aware of two figures standing over me. I recognized the girl, though I wasn't sure where from. She was several years older than me, blonde hair hanging in tangled rat tails in front of a pale face. Her expression was frenzied, her eyes wide. I knew them from a long time ago. "Hey," she was yelling. "Sweetie, you okay?" There was a guy next to her, the same age. He had dark hair poking from a baseball cap, an ugly scar cutting across his face. Something was molded into his left hand. "You sure she's still alive?" he muttered, his voice echoing in my skull. The girl shoved him and he stumbled. "Of course she's alive." "All right, jeez." The rest of their conversation was a blur in my mind. All I can remember is broken words, hissing and muttering. "Oh, we need to get it out." "When we get caught, look, just leave her. She's a D anyway. We expected this. We can't back out now, all right?" In and out of reality, I danced until the two of them were gone, and I was left wondering if I'd just hallucinated them. The sun was already baking into my clothes, hot and sweltering. It was the same sky I'd looked at the day before with a smile, with hopes for the future, my best friend and girlfriend by my side. I replayed those memories of Nick, Bobby, and I, swimming at the lake and road trips to the edge of town. Never out of town, though. We weren't allowed. And now I knew why. I don't know how long I lay there, huddled in the dirt, waiting to die, but not dying. I was wrapped in my own pain, agony filling me up, reminding my body that I was wrong, a defect, a Red. The sound of engines woke me up for what felt like the 10th time. They were loud, ripping into my brain. When I forced myself to my feet, I could walk. My body was still working, so I forced my legs into a run, following the sound of engines. But my foot caught on something. There was something lying on the ground. When I twisted around to see what it was, I had to slap my hand over my mouth to gag a screech crawling at my throat. I was looking at bodies. The bodies of blues and purples scattering the ground. And I knew every face. I knew each pair of dead eyes staring right through me. glimpsing telltale scarlet stains under their nose. I knew automatically what it was I was looking at. Defects. They were defects. But there were dozens of them. Not reds, I thought dizzily. They were blues and purples, those I'd spotted in the room with Bobby. I checked each face twice for Bobby and Nick, but I couldn't find them. Following the bodies like breadcrumbs in a fairy tale, I found myself back at the clearing overlooking the facility. There was a white van parked right outside the door, and being loaded into the back were my classmates. They were exactly what Mr. Fuller said they would become. Soldiers. Dressed in black, they marched in perfect sync, their arms by their sides. I spotted familiar faces. Sadie Lily, Danny Rue. There were maybe 10 in total. And the rest were in the woods. The rest were lying in dirt and pooled crimson. Name? One of the men from the night of our capture was standing next to the van. He loomed over a new recruit, a boy with his back to me. The boy wore the same as the others, a black shirt and matching pants. Something kept my gaze glued to him, but I didn't know what it was. Something about him sent my heart hurtling into my throat. I was in denial. I didn't want to notice the head of handsome dark coils that were back. When I got closer, I didn't want to accept that I was seeing a face I knew molded into something so close to perfect that it hurt. Well, I won't say Nick Castor looked perfect, because in my eyes he was so far from it. It almost looked like a real-life Photoshop. I couldn't focus on the face that I'd lost, however, because his expression was blank. The eyes I'd fallen in love with were derelict. Just from looking at him in that one moment, I knew 18 years of my best friend were gone. Just like that. Nick stood to attention, his arms at his sides. I don't have one, he responded. Age? 18 years old. How you feeling, boy? I feel nothing. The man nodded. What is your serial number? His expression didn't waver, but Nick's body jerked suddenly, and I had an ounce of hope that he was snapping out of it. But no. Something else was happening. Crimson pooled from his nose, and I had to bite down into my lower lip to stop myself crying out. Blood ran in tiny rivers, rivulets beating down pristine skin. But Nick, oh God, he still opened his mouth and responded through a toneless drawl. N4567, HJMN3Q. The man grunted. Got another defect, he yelled, shoving Nick to his knees and sticking a gun in his right temple. Oh, fucking defects, they're dropping like flies. Nick didn't blink. He didn't move. His gaze pinpointed on thin air. I couldn't watch. I could not fucking watch. Something ignited inside me, and I wanted to get as far away from there as possible. I started to back away before a warm hand was on my shoulder. Twisting around, I expected a teacher. But then I was seeing familiar golden curls and the smile I thought I'd lost. I thought I was crazy, that I was losing my mind. But then she was pulling me into a hug that suffocated my lungs. Her kisses tasted like rusty coins. Bobby was sobbing into my shoulder, and I was clinging onto her, trying to get a good grip of her so I wouldn't lose her. When Bobby pulled away and was blinking at me through teary eyes, I finally noticed what was wrong. Her face was pale, decorated with something I was all too familiar with. Hues of red. She looked like a Greek statue, one that had been defaced. I gingerly brushed my fingers against crimson crusting under her nose. Bobby was bleeding, just like Nick, just like the bodies on the forest floor. Her eyes were different, haunted. The pinch between her brows told me everything I needed to know. She was in pain, the type of pain that made her want to reach into her skull and rip out her brain, the type that was slowing her down. I could have laughed, could have cried, could have screamed, but all I could do was stare, raising my fingers over her nose and chin. It was still Bobby, Robin Atwood. She'd been polished. She was perfection, even more beautiful, but unnatural, like a porcelain doll. Oh, it hurts me to write this. You're a defect. Her laugh was shrill, and she spat out a mouthful of blood. Yeah, lucky me, right? But I shook my head. You can't be, you're... A gunshot cut me off, followed by the sound of a body hitting the ground. Bobby wrapped her arms around me, suffocating my scream. Her hold was far too tight, like a serpent coiling around my chest, squeezing. I didn't want to believe it was Nick. I would not believe it was him. Because it wasn't. It wasn't Nick who hit the ground. It wasn't Nick who lay in a pool of crimson. It wasn't Nick who the man kicked into the dirt, who he laughed at, his foot coming down repeatedly to stamp on his head. It wasn't him. It wasn't him. It was not him. Well, I want to continue right now. Trust me, but there are certain things I don't want to write. The others keep telling me to stop, but writing this is my therapy. It's what I can't tell anyone else outside Aceville. If I do, they'll find us. But I will post soon. In the coming days, I'm sure of it. Oh my god, what's going to happen next? Well, I think it's pretty clear from the end of that one that this is going to be a series, 3 parts in total if what I've read is true. Anyway, so we'll see. Next part coming very soon. Can you wait, can you? Well, you're going to have to, but I'll be getting back to this one very soon because I'm as intrigued as the rest of you are about this one. Whew. Well, hope you enjoyed that one. Comments in the comment section below the video, as always. I'll do my best to join in the chat. That's it for this evening, so until next time, which will be very soon, very, very sweet dreams, and bye-bye. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. Really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams, and bye-bye.